These are the new PolarPro X Peter McKinnon Chroma PL-VND filters, and I've got a slight issue with these. But before we get into that, let's talk about what these can actually do. Now here I've got two separate filters. Both of these are Chroma PL-VND filters. Now for those of you who don't know what Chroma PL-VND means, PL-VND basically means polarizer plus VND, VND being variable neutral density. And chroma is basically just the new type of glass being used to produce these filters. It's a much higher quality type of glass that's meant to be more color accurate and just better. So these are basically 2-in-1 filters that act as both as a polarizer and a variable neutral density filter, so a VND filter. But the difference between them is one of them, this one here, has a black mist diffusion built into it as well. So it's essentially a 3-in-1. So for those of you who are slightly new to this kind of stuff, here's a little bit of a lowdown on what all of this jargon means. So to start off with, let's talk about polarizers. Polarizers are basically filters that help you to reduce glare and reflections from your image. So if you're shooting things like cars, landscapes, lakes, water, anything that has some sort of a reflection on it or that can cause some sort of a glare, twisting the polarizer to the right kind of angle will help you remove the glare and reflections from your image. A VND is a variable neutral density filter. A neutral density filter, to begin with, is a type of sunglass for your camera. So what it does is it helps to reduce the amount of light essentially coming into your camera, thus making it easier, thus, you know, how posh I am. And so it makes it easier to be able to film or take photos in bright sunlight or lighting conditions that are not favorable, where you don't really want to touch your camera settings too much. But adding an ND filter or a neutral density filter helps to reduce the amount of light that gets into your camera lens. That being said, a variable ND filter is one where you can change the number of stops of light that get into your camera. And this can both help with reducing the light and also clearing up the image, slightly getting rid of glare and reflections as well, but not to the same extent as a polarizer does. And a diffusion filter is basically a filter that essentially helps diffuse light a little bit. It helps soften the image and it helps add this kind of a bloom effect to the light. Now I've got a very slight diffusion added onto the lens that I'm using for this video, and you can see in the light behind, it does have like a bit of a softer glow to it. Now if I were to remove that, you might see that that glow slightly disappears. Now like I said, the one I've got is very, very light, so the softening effect is very subtle. Plus I'm using a lens with a very low aperture, meaning that the aperture is wide open, so the blur in the background is a little bit heavier, so it might be hard to see, but hey, I tried. So now that that's all out of the way and I've wasted a whole bunch of time talking about that, let's get back to these Chroma PL-VND filters. Now I'm going to start with saying that I'm actually a huge fan of the PolarPro filters, especially the Peter McKinnon ones. Not only because I'm a huge Peter McKinnon fan and I take a lot of inspiration from his work, but because these filters are actually really good. I did have another one that I used to use, and you guys might be able to kind of see this one's actually quite cracked. I've got a kind of a video on this and how I cracked this. This was, past tense, the Signature Edition 2 ND filter, VND filter, 2 to 5 stops. And I dropped it on a beach shore and with a lens, and it cracked. And it's basically just there to remind me of my massive failure. I just keep it on my desk. So yeah, I've been using that filter for the longest time, and once it broke I needed replacement, so I decided that I'd get both a mist PL one, so the one that has a diffusion, and a standard polarizer PL-VND one, so that I've got two and I've got the option for using the mist and not having to stack an additional filter on top. And both of these are 2 to 5 stop filters, so the amount of light being reduced is from ND2 to ND32. If any of that makes any sense to you guys, then well done. If it doesn't make any sense, it basically means that it can reduce the number of stops of light from 2 stops to 5 stops. Now yes, I am a big fan of them and I do use them a lot, especially when I'm out and about and creating content, because that's where I need it the most. But sometimes also when I'm indoors and I want a specific kind of look to my videos, these help me achieve those looks. In my opinion, having a combination of a polarizer and a VND is an absolute win, because you've got both of the things that a videographer might need in one without having to stack filters. You've got a VND for situations where you've got way too much light out there and you just want to reduce the number of stops without having to touch your shutter, without having to affect your aperture, and this can do that. Plus the polarizer, which goes without saying. If you're doing anything like car videography or photography or shooting architecture or buildings or landscapes, this comes in super handy. Or even just cleaning up an image a little bit more, having that polarizer on top makes a massive difference because you can use it to get such a nice look, nice clean flat look to your image. I can't describe it. It's just this unique look that you get with the polarizers versus without, and it does really help make your footage look that much better. Now that's really objective. Now to talk about very quickly how these filters work, because you do have this kind of 2-in-1 structure. Let me just show you opening up. So they all come with this kind of defender cap, which just goes on top. You can actually have this on top of the lens, so you can keep this on your lens and then have the defender cap on top, and it stays like that, protecting your filter, your lens as well. It's a very handy thing, so I love having this on there. But basically the way this works is, and you'll see on the screen as well, B-roll, because I'm not going to be able to kind of hold this up and show you perfectly. You've essentially got 2 spinning parts to this filter. One part, which is this outer black part that you've got here, controls your polarization. So that's the polarizer aspect of it. So by spinning that, you're actually controlling the polarization of your filter. So that allows you to reduce the glare, reduce reflections, clean up the image of the sky, things like that. And the second is this gold part, which when you twist, changes the number of stops of your VND. So that's the VND aspect, the VND control. Again, because it's a 2 to 5 stop filter, it's got it numbered 2, 3, 4, and 5. So when you kind of toggle, switch, turn it to each of those on the filter, and that's how many stops of light it's stopping from getting into your camera. And this was also one of the winning features of the previous VND filters, is that these are haptic, meaning that when you twist them, there's like a small click, which essentially tells you that you've switched it. So if you just want to hear, I don't know if you guys will hear it. There's a little bit of a click to that, which basically is telling you it's going from 2 to 3 to 4 to 5. That's very handy, especially if you're not looking, you want to turn it, you want to be able to tell that it's actually got into that 3 stops rather than having to always look. It makes a world of difference. It's actually a really handy, meaningful feature that this has. So let's have a look at what each of these do. Now I'm going to be focusing more on the standard polarizer and not the mist one, because a lot of the footage you're going to see here has been done during the daytime, and the mist one, you can't really see it unless you're in specific types of lighting conditions, and I didn't film in those conditions, so I'm not really showcasing what the mist one is capable of. So I'm going to put that to the side. I'm going to focus on the standard one. So to start with, let's talk about the VND aspect of it. Like I said, I've used the standard VND version of it in the past, and I continue to like using the PolarPro one because I just think the quality is really good. This new chroma glass is fantastic. There's barely any color shift. Normally when you get these kind of filters, sometimes you might get like a blue tint or a yellow tint depending on the type of glass being used. With this, there is no tinting of your image. Essentially the image stays very, very, very close, if not the same color as you've set it to. So the color temperature, or the white balance, all of that, it's not affected by adding this filter on. So now I'm going to show you the effect that these actually have on your image, starting with the VND aspect. Now you'll see from the footage here, when I'm turning the VND part of this filter, you can see the difference it makes in terms of the amount of light getting into my camera, and also on the overall image. So you start off with maybe slightly overexposed, there's too much glare, too much light coming in, and as soon as I start twisting that filter, what you'll see is that the exposure fixes itself. So as I increase the number of stops, the amount of light coming into your image is reduced massively. And that's again very helpful, because especially if you're shooting video, this becomes kind of your best friend. Now when you're shooting video, you ideally want to keep things like your shutter speed the same because of the amount of motion blur in your image. Also keeping your aperture low if you want that specific kind of a look. You can pump your aperture up or your shutter up if you don't really care about that. You're not going for that cinematic look. I tend to like having that cinematic look in my videos. I personally like keeping my aperture and shutter speed the same. And with ISO, in those situations, you don't really want to be increasing your ISO, but because of cameras like the ones that I'm using, the Sony ZV-E1 or the A7S III or the FX3 or any sort of cameras these days have a base ISO level. You don't really want to go beyond that base ISO level or below that base ISO level. You want to keep to that base ISO level because that's what gives you the cleanest image. So anyway, you want to keep those three things the same, and that's where this comes in. That VND basically helps you to control the amount of light that gets in there. And you can again easily change that to go back to adjust the exposure the way that you want to. Now let's talk about the polarizer aspect of this. So I've switched to this building over here because the other building wasn't as reflective and this has more reflective surfaces. So you'll be able to see how the polarizer works better on this one. So now obviously, again, with the polarizer, you can see here actually the big difference it makes on the reflections and the light. You can see in the background here, right now, it's kind of blown out, you know, you can't see the clouds as clearly, and especially on the kind of window panes, it's not as clear. But if I turn the polarizer, you'll see what massive difference that makes now to the reflections and everything. You can see the clouds way more clearly. You can see the window panes a lot more clearly. There's not as many reflections on the thing. It looks a lot more matte. So this kind of a filter is so good for things like landscapes and architecture, cars, all that. So anything that has reflections on it, this does a great job of getting rid of those reflections, getting rid of those highlights to fix that exposure. Now, I did say I had one very slight issue with this. And even though it's not really a big deal for me either, I wanted to call it out because I did find it annoying. As a solo creator or as a creator who does use his camera handheld a lot, using this thing single-handed is very difficult. Now with the older one, the one that I had here, it was very easy to have it on the lens and then just twist the golden aspect. Even from the side, twist the golden aspect and not worry about the whole filter changing. Like I could actually have it screwed on and without kind of holding the filter, just turn it, because I'd be able to hold the lens or keep one hand on the camera and turn it. But I can't do that with this one because it's got two turning controls, and that makes things a little bit difficult. Obviously now it's on a tripod, so I can, you know, hold the filter and kind of twist the VND part of it however I want. It's quite easy. But if I'm using it on the go, it is a lot harder to do that, because then I've got one hand gripped on the camera and then the other hand I'm trying to like just shuffle the VND, and if I'm trying to do it on the fly, it just doesn't work properly. So that's the only gripe I've got with it, because it is just a little bit harder to kind of maneuver with one hand or to kind of change the filter with one hand. I kind of have to bring it down, adjust it with two hands, and then kind of bring it up again. So there are filters out there where you have two separate kind of wedges or little rods that poke out. They control each of the two parts of the filter. So one that controls the VND specifically, the other that controls the polarizer. Now this does kind of have that. It has this little black grippy part here where you can kind of hold on to that and change the polarizer or the VND. But again, to do that, you have to hold one and twist the other. So it's just a minor inconvenience that could easily be fixed, but it's not the end of the world and I can live with it. So despite that, overall, what do I think about these filters? Again, I've used PolarPro filters for a long time now. I mean, well, when I say filters, I used this filter for the longest time, the original Signature Edition VND 2 to 5 stops, which is now broken and sits on my desk as a display piece. I used that for a couple of years, ever since it kind of first came out. I was so excited when it came out, and then I bought one and I just used that one for ages until it broke. And now I've got two. So I've got these two, you know, the mist one and the standard one, and I absolutely love them. I think they are absolutely fantastic filters. I think that the quality that these filters bring is amazing, and I think that they're really valuable pieces of my kit. But does that mean I would recommend them to anybody? Yes, I would recommend them to anybody who can afford them. They do come at a bit of a premium price, so it might not be made for everybody. I'm a bit of a tech junkie where I just do go out of my way and buy things that I might not necessarily need, or I could do with an alternative. But with these, I didn't want to compromise. I just think that these ones are the best ones in my personal opinion. There might be better ones. I haven't used any other ones really to be able to bring you guys a comparison. So I'll never give you unsolicited advice and just tell you, yeah, these are fantastic, absolutely, go buy them. I bought these myself. I love them. They work for me, and I gain nothing from telling you to go out and buy them. So what I would say is that as a creator, and as a creator who knows what it's like to work on a budget, definitely research the filters that you want to get. And if you find an alternative that's cheaper and it just does work for you, then absolutely, because at the end of the day, the gear doesn't make the footage. The gear doesn't increase your quality significantly. It's how you use that gear. So if you've got something cheaper and you can use it better, or it just does the job, then why bother? So there you have it. That's what I think of these Chroma PL-VND filters from PolarPro x Peter McKinnon. Absolutely love them myself. I have that one minor issue with them, which again is a very minor issue where using them one-handed is a bit of a pain, but it's something you can get over, and it might not be an inconvenience to other people, but it is to me. Overall, fantastic filters. Would definitely recommend these if they're within your budget to get, and you've done the due diligence research to check whether these are the most suitable types of filters for you. Hope that was in some way or another useful to you, and all of my rambling helped in some way. Please guys, make sure you hit a like down below and subscribe if it did help. And if you do want to see more videos about tech, content creation, camera gear, all of that kind of stuff, then that would be really helpful for the channel. Until next time, this is Kaya24 signing out.